We're about to hear from some business leaders in this space really pushing us to take blockchain into the mainstream. Jeremy Allaire of Circle and Meltem Demir of CoinShares will be joining us. And leading that conversation is none other than the superstar journalist and one of my favorite podcasts, Lara Shin. Lara, thank you so much for being here with us, and I will hand it off to you.
Great, thanks for having me. So thank you to everyone for joining our discussion, Crypto on Every Corner, Driving Adoption, featuring Jeremy Allaire, co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Circle, and Meltem Demirs, Chief Strategy Officer at CoinShares. Welcome, Meltem. Is Meltem here?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I don't know why I can't see you in the screen, but I guess it's the particularities of Zoom. All right, so the topic of today's discussion is how the crypto industry can drive adoption. I just wanted to find out from you guys, how do you define that? What do you think the world will look like once crypto has been adopted?
Go ahead, Mel.
I think, there's two sort of visions, and I think, I don't know, maybe we can just be honest with ourselves. Sometimes I worry about the vision we have for cryptocurrency. So where I started, and I have a lot of respect for Jeremy and the team at Circle, because back when I was in grad school in Boston, I actually used Circle to buy a lot of Bitcoin back in the day. So kudos to you, Jeremy. You saved me from my days of buying Bitcoin on Craigslist and using Gox and spending money each fan. So
glad I could be helpful.
Yeah, so you helped me stack my sats in the early days of Bitcoin. But look, I think there's sort of two visions, and they're two very different visions. The vision I've always had for Bitcoin that I think is a really compelling one is the separation for the first time of money and state. Money has been an object of the state since Julius Caesar stamped his face on a gold coin. And I think really the experiment we're attempting here, like the world is no longer defined by physical borders. We live in a very digital world. Anyone can be anyone on the internet. We have many different identities, many different communities we're part of, sometimes as our default reality selves, sometimes we're pseudonymous. There are a lot of eggs on Twitter who are anonymous individuals. So I think we live in this really interesting world that is truly becoming borderless. And to me, Bitcoin really represents the evolution of money and transfer value in that world. But then at the same time, I think governments are looking at Bitcoin. I mean, right now we're living in a world where governments are trying to ban math. They're literally trying to ban encryption. We've done this time and time again for the last 25 years since encryptions existed. But the advent of central bank digital currencies, and certainly what we've seen in the Asia Pacific region in particular with the advent of DCP and sort of national quote unquote digital currencies, I do have a lot of concerns around the ability for people to have financial privacy in transactions, privacy in their communications. So we have these two very different paths down which we're heading. I don't know if they're going to coexist. I don't know if it's going to be an epic collision. And I know, Jeremy, you've also, been working a lot on USDC, which arguably has a big role to play here. But I think the future of cryptocurrencies in our society is sort of at this very interesting impasse. I want Bitcoin to exist. I believe people have the right to privacy, that people have the right to pseudonymity in their transactions. But I think governments certainly do not like that and are advocating now for the antithesis of that, which is central bank digital currencies and monetary systems that give them complete control and the ability to exert financial censorship at every level of society. So Jeremy, I'll pass it to you.
No, totally. I mean, there's so much there. I guess it just as a technologist, to the question of when will this be, whatever, mainstream or however you want to call that. My view is that, things are mainstream in terms of technology when they disappear, when they're invisible to people. And when essentially people just take them for granted, right? And so depending on your age and depending on where you are, you might take for granted social media, but obviously that wasn't something that existed, whatever X number of years ago, or you might take for granted that, you have this amazing, supercomputer. And that's just like, that is reality. That is what the world was, but obviously that had changed. So at what point is the use of crypto so ubiquitous and so embedded in so many things that we just take it for granted? So we have quite a ways to go on that. But I think we're making really, really strong progress. I think when I also think about that question, I really think about, crypto and blockchain it's a pretty broad surface area, right? You can be narrowly focused and sort of say there's non-sovereign stores of value that use a blockchain infrastructure, Bitcoin, Zcash, et cetera, which I completely agree with Meltem, right? There's this is this new form of borderless internet money, and it will continue to grow and scale. And I'm quite optimistic about that. But then there's the fundamentals of the broader technology, right? So, public chain infrastructure as effectively a new operating system layer on the internet, a new set of operating systems for storing data, conducting transactions, and executing code. That's what operating systems can help do. And so these new operating system layers, are very, very general purpose in many respects. They're well suited to what I call fiduciary trust applications, but can also be, I was in a hackathon panel with Meltem the other day, and we were looking at someone who built, a decentralized messaging application on top of Solana. The point being,
and decentralized fantasy football.
Decentralized fantasy football, right? So digital games, messaging applications, all of these things on decentralized infrastructure, Web3, et cetera. Like that part of this is also a very, very important part of this. And so, and something like stable coins, like regulated stable coins, like USDC or potentially Libra, like these are also like apps that run on these new operating systems and could be quite popular. And so I think in terms of the question of when does that become mainstream, I think we're really close there. I think in the next 12 to 24 months, many of the most popular digital wallet products in the world that we think of and use like as peer-to-peer payment apps or other things like that, they're going to turn on these protocols. They're going to turn these on, and you're going to have, all of a sudden hundreds of millions of people that can make interoperable payments with each other. And that will kind of be in the background. That will kind of be invisible. You won't be trapped in making payments to people who have Venmo. You'll be able to make payments between Venmo and Square Cash and PayPal and Swish in Sweden and Vips in Norway, and go around the world to all these different apps. They're all going to speak these common protocols, and I think that will be a mainstream phase in digital currency that's coming. And I think ultimately, that same number of people who might feel, okay, like I'm using euros or dollars or whatnot, feeling comfortable using Bitcoin, that will grow too. And eventually, I would expect billions of people will want to use Bitcoin too.
Yeah, the way that I think about it also is, 10 or 15 years ago, I didn't wake up and check multiple communications apps, like iMessage and WhatsApp and Signal and Telegram and Facebook Messenger and Twitter DMs. But this nowadays, it's like, probably one of the first things I do when I wake up. So I imagine that it'll be the same here, but for like a huge variety of financial transactions. And, like Jeremy said, across the globe, not just with people that I know. And I also think that there will probably be a lot of ways to make passive income off these networks. And it will be, not with like a huge company at the center of it, but just kind of like little mini democracies around the world. So let's now kind of talk about where we are in this cycle, because even though we're far off from this vision that we created, I do think that this has been a landmark year in some ways, probably with the biggest news being PayPal introducing the sale and purchase of Bitcoin and 3 other cryptocurrencies on its platform. So how would you describe kind of like where we are in our current stage?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly. Look, I think at this point, I'm shocked that it took PayPal this long, to be candid. You know, there are a lot of stories unfolding here, and if we sort of pull at the threads here, I was listening to Reid Hoffman in the last session, chatting with Danelle from the Stellar Foundation about his journey at PayPal, and he used the word, we were so naive when we started PayPal, which I thought was interesting. When we look at traditional fintechs, I think many of them have recognized the power of adding crypto to their platform. Number one, it's a huge revenue driver. Square's Bitcoin revenue has grown quarter over quarter by really, really large percentages. I think this last quarter, their Bitcoin revenue grew close to 200%. And not only that, I think executives are seeing the impact to both private company valuations and public company valuations of adding crypto. Similarly, if we look at the PayPal story, PayPal, has 300 million users. They only, though, transmit, I think, about $700 billion of value a year. If we look at what's happening in APAC, Alipay last year transmitted $17 trillion of value on their network. So I think there are these radical differences in how people around the world are using payment systems. And there is a competition afoot, right? Like at the end of the day, what we're competing for is what we were competing for with the internet. I remember my first interactions on the internet were with, chat apps, but then AOL came along and sort of made the internet accessible for people like my parents who weren't, playing video games and playing around on these chat groups with weirdos all around the world. And I kind of view money the same way, right? We have people who are building these closed networks, but all of these payment apps have the same fundamental challenge. And I think Jeremy articulated it really well. If I have PayPal and he has Venmo, we can't interact with one another, even though we have the same phone, even though we live in the same country, we're standing right next to each other, but we can't transmit value. How insane is that? So in my view at this point, large companies adopting crypto, it's a must have. I'm shocked it's taking them this long. And it is driving valuations, it's driving revenue, it's a no brainer. And let's not forget, when you add crypto, you also get access to one of the most powerful marketing channels in the world, which is crypto Twitter. Like we have an army of people on the internet who are obsessed with crypto. And anytime anyone does something like Paul Tudor Jones talks about Bitcoin, if you look at his Google search results, like flatline, the minute he talks about Bitcoin, huge spike. So in terms of relevance, I think a lot of companies have recognized if you market to Bitcoiners, like it's a great way to get eyeballs on what you're doing. So let's not underestimate the power of crypto Twitter. Shout out to everyone, because it's an amazing community to market to.
Yeah, I mean, just checking in on like where we're at. I mean, I think, this year was a really big year. I think that having, mainstream consumer fintechs, we've had, Revolut and Robinhood and Square and others. Like I think, as Meltem said, it was only a matter of time that PayPal would introduce some support. And obviously, there's been this tremendous rise in many different dimensions here, right? There's been obviously the rise in the absolute price of Bitcoin. There's been this incredible surge in growth in stablecoin usage, like USDC. We've seen $200 billion of on-chain transactions. It's just incredible to see that amount of growth. And obviously, you're seeing credit markets that exist now that are smart contract based. These yield markets, which is phenomenon, that's grown enormously this year. All of these things are thematically. These were twinkles in someone's eye a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, and now they're actually playing out. So I think the twinkle in the eye that we just talked about of like interoperable digital wallets and people using cryptocurrency within that, whether it's stable coins or Bitcoin or both, which I think it'll oftentimes be both. That may be much faster than we expect, and I think we're seeing. Digital wallet projects in every corner of the world, in every currency market in the world, who are embracing this. And so, that is going to, like the early internet, it's going to light up this global network, and all of a sudden, everyone will be connected, and that's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I do agree. It sort of feels like right now is sort of this tee up moment where like a lot of people are just kind of getting access to what would be necessary for a kind of next big step. And yet, I also think that there are some other things that need to be resolved before the ball can really move forward. And I think, maybe one of those things might be regulatory questions that need to be resolved or like certain kinds of other infrastructure that need to be built. So, what do you think are kind of the next critical steps for where the crypto industry needs to go, I guess in the next year or so?
I've been thinking a lot about this. I can touch on a couple and go from there. But on the infrastructure side, I mean, clearly, and this is really just from a little bit of a narrow perspective here, which is sort of stablecoin view. In order for this to work at scale for consumer scale payments, we need to be using blockchain infrastructure that is designed for that. And so, one of the really key things, I am not what I call a blockchain maximalist. Like, I don't have a blockchain that I say, well, that's definitely going to be the dominant blockchain. There's a huge amount of innovation in this space. You're seeing, obviously projects like Stellar really starting to get traction with a lot of different financial applications. You see DeFi happening on things like Ethereum, but it's hitting constraints. You're seeing other new chains that launch that are focused on things like, decentralized markets or regulated securities or other kinds of things. So, but all of this needs this infrastructure. We need scale. We need to be able to have applications. Like if we have these consumer wallet applications that are pointing at a public internet network and pointing their users at a public internet network, and you're settling transactions, you need to be able to support, thousands and then tens of thousands of transactions per second. And we're seeing that. We're seeing blockchains that can do that. And so that's really, really exciting. That's been a missing piece, is that combination there. There's a lot on the regulatory side. But even there, and maybe we'll come back to that in more detail. You can, for some people, the regulatory work, you can call it progress, meaning that there is actually increasing amounts of clarity or rulemaking that's happening in different parts of the world, and other people that's not progress, that's actually restrictive and will I think, potentially destroy some of the potential benefits of this technology. And but I think for everyday users and businesses to say, yes, this is a legitimate financial infrastructure for the modern economy, for this digital economy, there will have to be, these rule sets and they're going to need to be consistently applied in a lot of places. And so that's a key piece that's unfolding literally as we speak.
Meltem, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Look, let's just be very realistic. I run a regulated business. Jeremy's in a regulated business, right? We've certainly had a lot of interactions with regulators. At this stage, I like to joke it would have been easier to start a bank than to start a crypto company, because it would have been less onerous.
Totally. Yeah.
Right? I'm like, why are we doing this? But look, let me maybe take a slightly contrarian view, because I think it's fun when we get to disagree on things. While certainly, I think right now we're going through this phase, and we've been talking about it forever. The institutions are coming. What does it look like for crypto? Which really, let's for a minute talk about how unique cryptocurrencies are. We built an entirely separate market with its own infrastructure, with its own unique sort of marketplaces, its own unique financial instruments, entirely outside of the existing financial system. For the last 12 years, that is what we've been doing. That's what I've been investing in. That's what Jeremy was building, initially at Circle. And he was trying to create that first bridge between the traditional US banking system, ACH, and, being able to use the correspondent banking system to buy and sell cryptocurrencies. That really has only started in earnest now. But the question is, does adopting cryptocurrencies mean that institutions continue to exist in their current form? And I am certainly personally of the mind that institutions should not continue to operate in their current form. I don't think it would be a step forward for society if we took cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and shoved them in a vault at BNY Mellon or JP Morgan Chase or another institution and gave people synthetic Bitcoin to trade. That is not the point of what we're doing here. Yes, maybe we get slightly faster transactions, but you don't need a blockchain or a digital currency to do that. I think the true value and the true potential of cryptocurrencies and their ability, to Jeremy's point, to create these open protocols, these open source networks where anyone can build, anyone can interact on them. Yes, a business that you build in a particular jurisdiction will obviously be subject to the rules and regulations of that particular jurisdiction. But the whole point of the internet is it's open and it's borderless and permissionless, and anyone can interact with the internet. Obviously, if I'm accessing the internet in China versus accessing the internet in the US, my experience is going to be different due to the service provider in that jurisdiction, but we're still utilizing the same protocols. We're still utilizing a lot of the same infrastructure, and we're accessing a lot of similar platforms. I think the challenge I have is I really want to see cryptocurrencies change the way that institutions function. I think we are long overdue for a change in our relationship with money. I am of the mindset that, the separation of money and state is one of the most important experiments that we have ever conducted as humanity. It's profoundly interesting from a philosophical perspective, from a political perspective, a cultural perspective. I always like to say, like, Bitcoin is a social movement first and foremost. I'll sound like the crazy radical here. I'm not ashamed to say that. Like, welcome to our cult. We have great swag and great memes. But look, I think the core question for me is how can we use cryptocurrencies to evolve how our institutions function, right? Because at the end of the day, humans don't define themselves by the jurisdiction in which they're physically located anymore. And we're in this really weird world. And I do sympathize with regulators because they're grappling with a number of challenges on a number of fronts that come from like the shift from a physical world to a very digital world. And the digital world doesn't have jurisdiction, not in the traditional sense. So how are you going to regulate something that has no CEO, that has no headquarters, that has no physical jurisdiction? You can't. You have to change your mental framework for how you think about these things. And I think that is what's really taking time. It's going to take a shift in who's in power, and we're seeing that, right? A lot of younger people are in Congress. There are a lot of people from communities who haven't historically been in Congress. We have the most women in power in the US than we've had in our entire country's history, right? Like, that is also crazy. It's the year 2020, and just now do we have an elected official in the White House who is a woman? It's bizarre to me. But there's a lot of change happening, and there's a changing out of the old guard, as I call it. And there are people with different mindsets who are coming in who are looking at the world and saying, well, why are we doing things this way? And that's why I love working in technology and venture capital, is I get to interact with people like Jeremy every day who say, wait a minute, we don't have to do things this way. We can actually change what it means to be a financial institution. That's what's so exciting to me, is like, we get to create a new narrative and we get to rewrite the story of what it means to be a financial institution. And that, I think, is actually going to be the most powerful thing that we can build, that we can do. I am so excited about it. I think it's amazing. I hopefully it's coming through the screen. I am so excited about it.
I would like ladder off that quickly, which is just to say, like the changes that become possible when money works the way the internet works, and it goes so much deeper than that. I mean, I think to Meltem's point, like, we are seeing experiments right now with the creation of new, what I call kind of corporate forms, basically new structures that are entirely governed in crypto, where the entirety of the way in which participants are involved, the way in which governance happens, the way in which value is exchanged, the way in which value is created and derived, that's all being managed on blockchains. No connection to a externalized legal system, or no connection to the traditional financial system. And in economics, and I studied economics as well, and you've got microeconomics and you've got macroeconomics. And in microeconomics, you're focused on the theory of the firm and what is a firm and what happens in a firm. And we have joint stock corporations as the modern, model. I believe we are right now seeing a revolution away from joint stock corporations and into digitally native entities that are entirely exist in tokenized form and entirely exist on blockchains. And if you're starting a project and you want to collaborate with people and exchange value and ultimately create work output and so on, it's going to move to those kinds of forms. And that just goes so far outside of the global legal system is even capable of contemplating. But that's what people are doing.
Yeah.
Let's
so I'm gonna
lawyers. Jeremy, let's do it. Let's get rid of it.
Yes, and I'm excited to cover you guys at creating this brand new thing, which is amazing. So we literally have just 1 minute left. So I'm going to ask one quick question. You only get to say one sentence with your answer, and then I'm going to just do these some of the Q&As that are also short answers. But what are some of your favorite success stories when it comes to adoption? So maybe just pick one company with like one reason why that's one of your favorite success stories so far with adoption. And while you're thinking about that, one of the Q&As that came in was, when is USD coming to Stellar? Someone wants to know when they can trade it on a DEX.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I can answer that audience question. So yeah, we announced USDC for Stellar, and it's coming soon.
Okay, you don't have a date. Okay, favorite success stories, and then we're going to close out.
Go ahead.
What are your favorite success stories when it comes to adoption so far? And just give a 1-sentence reason.
Yeah, favorite success story, Bitcoin as savings technology. I'm from Turkey. People in countries like Turkey are able to use Bitcoin to protect themselves from the debasement of their own currencies and preserve their wealth and their financial sovereignty. I think that's so empowering. And to me, that's why I love cryptocurrencies. Like, let's empower individuals, not institutions.
I like really, really small world anecdotes, which is I heard a story of a firsthand story of a person who was fleeing Colombia because of specific human rights violations, and they knew that they were going to have to cross a border to get out, and they were going to be confronted with police, and everything would be taken from them. And they created a brain wallet, and they walked across the border with their Bitcoin in their brain, and all their wealth was preserved. And I thought, that's changing the world.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm sure I would forget the brain wallet, but that's just me. But anyway. Okay, you guys. Well, this has been so great. I'm so glad I got to see you again. And thank you so much for participating in our panel.
My pleasure. Take
See
care.
you.